Hi, it's according to where we left off.
Yeah, we're talking about Arthur escaping from jail and escaping and eventually going to Israel and getting the Israeli government to fly him there. It was a big international thing at the time, so that's why that happened. The Ted Fram was found dead a few years later.
Who was Ted Fram?
He was the person who helped him. I married to my cousin Hillary.
Oh,
He was the one who'd driven him to the border and out of the country, and that had been instrumental in hiding him. He was 27 or 28 years old, athletic, lean, and was found dead of a heart attack. And the insurance,
like the CIA.
This insurance never paid the life insurance because it was such a suspicious death. When Celia and I got married in 1964, we lived for 9 months in Johannesburg, and I was giving extra math lessons to hang on a sec. And we recorded.
I can pause it. The background noise in this next section is Oma over here cooking tacos to dinner. She won't let anyone help her in the kitchen. Okay.
I was giving extra math lessons to two people. Ted Fram, who was very interested in getting more educated, and I was helping him with understanding maths. And my cousin, Stevie Fine, who was the son of Mike Fine. And 2 years later, Mark Fine was my father's brother.
Okay.
2 years later, it was terrible. They were both dead. Ted Fram had died in this very mysterious circumstances, found dead of a supposed heart attack in his car. And Stevie was a first-year university student at the University of Witwatersrand. And at a party, having had too much to drink, a beer or two, he jumped off a little stone wall and landed on a faucet sticking out of the ground, which went right through him and killed him. And really horrific situation. His parents.
You have the photo of him in Coco, right?
Yes, I've got the photo of him. His parents, Mike and May, just never recovered from that tragedy. And their younger daughter, younger two daughters, the family was devastated, but they were just completely devastated until they died. They could not get over the fact that their son had been killed died in this tragic way. But of course, by then I had long left South Africa. One other thing you asked me about my early childhood. When we stayed in Emmarentia, I had a friend, Peter Rosenfeld, and I went to his, must have been his 7th or 8th birthday party in Melville. And a week later, he got mumps. And then I got mumps. And then I gave it to my brother, Ray. And when Ray had mumps, he had encephalitis with it, very high fever and swelling of the brain. And that knocked out most of his brain. And he was, after that, severely retarded. My mother could not forgive me for that. And she would always say, if only you hadn't gone to that damn birthday party, then your brother would be okay. And your brother was so bright and talking, and you were the dunce in the family. And why did you have to go to that birthday party? And this continued for me all my life in South Africa. It was became one of the reasons why I left South Africa, because this continuous harping nonstop about my brother. I shared a room with Ray after that as we grew older. Hazel was separate. Hazel remembers this part very well, living in Melbourne and then Johannesburg and then Marentia. And so that was always a big part of me, and it makes me so strongly pro-vaccine, because of vaccine, people don't realize how important it is to be vaccinated against diseases like mumps and measles, which can throw off encephalitis. So I'm someone who really understands the importance of vaccines. Going to King Edward's High School, which was a prestigious boys' high school. There was King Edward's, Parktown Boys High, and there was Jeppe High. And I was not very good at sports, but I was on the swim team, and I managed to make it onto the swim team. And I don't think I ever won any races, but I was on the swim team, except when we had medleys. And then as I was at high school, I slowly worked my way from the bottom of the E grade to the bottom of the A grade. So by the time it came to our final year of high school, we wrote our exam called a matric, I was actually in the A grade. What changed the world for me was when the first Sputnik went out. I was mesmerized by that in my final year, 59, and go outside and see this and hear this thing coming over across the horizon, and you could hear it beeping on the radio. And that just mesmerized me into the world of science and engineering. And my grades went from literally a failing grade in science to an A grade in science, just in a semester. And that's why I got interested in science, and why I wanted to go to do science at university. Prior to that, I was thinking of doing.
Sputnik, right? You mentioned Sputnik.
Pardon?
Did you mention the Sputnik thing?
First Sputnik, yeah. It was just, far away in South Africa, the bottom of the globe. Suddenly seeing this thing flying over was incredible shock to the system to see it come over, and it was man-made. And seeing this and hearing the star come over, it was just, I remember being outside whenever it came over, and just the local radio stations would say when it was coming, and you could listen to it going beep, 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 beep. It was mesmerizing to watch that, and that got me interested in science. I remember one incident. We had been studying one of Hemingway's books about the First World War, and a soldier had been injured on the battlefield, and he was crying for his mommy because he'd been injured. And I remember asking the teacher, why would someone, if they hurt, cry for their mommy? I mean, my mother was the last person I would call for. I would call for our black maid, Mildred. I would call for her and my father, but my mother, I wouldn't call for my mother. It was the last thing I would do. And it struck me many years later what that all meant. But at the time, I remember the teacher taking me aside, Mr. Goosen, taking me aside and saying, was that real? I mean, what are you talking about there? But I didn't think twice of it. It was just something that I grew up with. I went to, from the age of about 12, I went to the Jewish Scouts, Habonim, and I went to the.
How do you spell that?
Hobonim, Habonim.
Sorry, can you say that again? Hob.
Habonim. You can look it up on the web. It's a Jewish Scout movement.
I got it. Okay.
And I went there as a very young boy, and then as a middle, in the middle group, and then I finally went as one of the senior boys who were looking after the other boys. And so I spent a lot of time in Habonim, and the last camp I went to was where I met Celia. She was there, and that's how I got to know Celia. She was her dad had reluctantly let one of his 4 daughters go to a camp, which was a very difficult transition for a South African Jewish father. Many years later, David Fine from Israel came to South Africa and worked at Habonim at their headquarters. And it was a funny story. on one of my visits to South Africa, I'd heard he was there, and I called up Harbonim, and I asked to speak to David Fine. And the person said, okay, I'll put you through. Who's calling? And I said, David Fine. And the secretary started swearing and thinking I was joking with her, which was a funny incident. But I said, no, I'm a cousin. And she wouldn't listen to me. She put the phone down. David was hysterical about it because he'd heard about it. I remember one thing with David, his mother Hilda and his father had remarried a man called Jack Levine. And international phone call was very expensive when I was about 12. Of course, there were no satellites. It was all on a trunk line under the ocean. And the whole family had gathered to listen to the phone call because it was coming in, which was a very big deal. And so they had two phones, and there was an upstairs and a downstairs phone, and Hilda was upstairs and Jack was downstairs. And she was relayed to us by David later as well. He started to speak, and then Jack said, you sound different. Hilda said, you sound different. And Jack downstairs said, no, I'm not. Are you okay? And Hilda and his mother and father started talking to each other. And David from Israel couldn't get a word in for the 3-minute phone call. It's a complete waste of, which was then a lot of money to make the phone call. How the world has changed. A phone call then was a big deal. You had to book the call at least 24 hours in advance. It was $3 to $10 a minute, and it had to be booked, and it had to be, you were timed, and it was a very big deal to have an international phone call.
You told me the story about your scar on your knee.
When we were living in Emmarentia, I used to ride my bicycle at the Emmarentia Dam right near where we lived. It was a very isolated area, sort of not really roads, but paths, bicycle paths, and it was a sand road a little bit. And I was riding my bicycle and alone, and I fell off my bicycle and sat up, and my kneecap was exposed. I had torn the skin off my kneecap, and the kneecap had actually come loose. And I was in shock, didn't know what to do. There's no way I could have moved from there. And a car came by, two lovers, illicit lovers, saw me with my bicycle next to me, but my knee all exposed and bleeding. And they took me to the children's hospital. Drove me to the children's hospital, where once I got there, I was able to get hold of my father. But I remember that very clearly, these people having to carry me into the car, and I was probably 15, 16 at the time. But we never thought for a moment that there was any risk in riding a bicycle. No one, of course, had a helmet. It was just I fell off a bicycle and came off, hit a stone or something, and came off and just landed wrong in a bad way. I still got the scar, and I've still got the scar on my left knee. It doesn't bother me now. I mean, when I run, I wear knee guards, a strap around the knee, and so it doesn't bother me. But at the time, it was a big deal.